Welcome to the second episode of the Manaburnt podcast. We're back again. It's myself and Lily hosting again.
Hello.
We're also joined by Mike from last time.
Hi.
And now we have a couple of new guests. Two Nicks. We'll start with Nicholas, if you want to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi everybody. I'm Nick from Australia. I both work in I guess I work with my geek credentials in two industries at the moment. One, I run a small press RPG publishing company called Owlman Press, and I also work in adult education using gamification and specifically board games as a teaching tool.
Awesome.
Yeah, if any of you follow us regularly, we actually did a review of Nick's wonderful game several months ago. So yes, you can check that out. But yeah, Nick, tell us a bit more about some of the stuff that you've been writing, because I know a lot about this, but no one else does. So tell us a bit more about the sort of most recent project.
Yeah, I suppose last year as well, it's like I kind of just went back into the writing cave for a while, and we didn't have many releases. So Scum and the Stars is probably our most notable game at the moment, where it's basically a space opera with the situation flipped. Instead of playing heroes of, like the Space Knight or the wise old dude who decided to become a hippie in a cave. Instead of playing those kind of positive roles, I'm not sure hippie in a cave is positive, but hey, we flip the scenario. You play the villains, the pirates, the outlaws, the barbarians, the gunslingers, the smugglers, the crime lords.
Yeah.
So that game is it's a lot of fun, and it's a lot of kind of like wacky gonzo space opera chaos. So I've gone back into the writing cave with that one, and we're working on releasing this year a book called The Imperial Census, which will be basically just a big book of different weird alien species. We've got some wonderful kind of wacky things lined up, from living mathematical algorithms to kind of like a kind of octopus that eats like liquid crystal, to some like spins on the old, like, we're going to take a earth animal and we're going to make it humanoid, thereby it's alien kind of trope.
Great, yeah. Seen that before.
I've also been, they're totally original, that one. Totally original. I've also been working very hard on a revisionist cyberpunk game called Bubblegum Skull.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to serve as Owlman Press's new core system. Very quick, very fast, very much about the sort of the blurring of human and machine. And, we're all a little bit cyberpunk these days, and we're all a little bit cyborg. And where's that going? So very flexible, just a simple 1d6 roll. See if you get higher than your target number.
That's fair.
Yeah, I had a look at that. It seems pretty good. All right, so we also have another guest today that we shouldn't forget. We have Nikola.
Hey. So yeah, my full name is Nikola. I also go by Nick. It's easier to pronounce for foreigners, especially. And yeah, I'm from Bulgaria, and I'm pretty sure I'm the only non-native speaker here. So better.
No, I'm not native technically.
Well, technically, yeah, of course. No, your accent is much better than mine, for sure.
You'll sometimes forget with Lily, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm lucky enough to be a professional geek, I'd say. I'm a professional esports journalist. I write for esports.com, and I run lots of the social media connected to it. I'm a board game designer. I'm signed and soon to be published with my first game, The King of All Bards. And I play in a medieval type band, like neo-folk, which I think is geeky, so it counts.
They are super cool.
There's a big crossover there, definitely, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. For somebody with a law degree, I do lots of like writing and stuff.
Nice.
So, can you tell us a bit more about your sort of most recent involvement? Well, I know that you have barriers because obviously you cannot disclose some of your most recent projects. But can you give us a bit more of detail, a bit more juiciness as to what you're currently working on, even if it's just from the point of view of development or what you are dealing with?
Oh, okay, sure. I'm constantly working on lots of things. This is kind of how I do everything. But my board game is definitely a priority at the moment. The rules are pretty much written and ready. Most of the art is ready, and we really should be ready with the entire project very soon, like in a matter of a month or two, hopefully. And also, we've set some business things in motion. We would like to get the game to other publishers and see if we can think of partnerships. So we're quite ahead in the project at this point. I also show the game all the time. I go to all of the local conventions and gaming related events. So a lot of people have already touched the game and played, including Lily. I'm pretty sure you've played it once, right?
I think I may have this is actually the way we met.
Yes.
I went on holiday to Bulgaria 2017 now, and we ended up in this wonderful game cafe in the middle of town, and there you were, essentially teaching people random board games and whatnot. And I'm fairly confident. I'm not entirely sure if I got to play through it in full, but I certainly saw most of it, I think. Yeah, I can't remember now exactly how far we went there because we did loads of things that night. But
Oh, yeah.
and there was a lot of meat involved in the process, I must say.
Nice.
But no, yeah, it looked great. I mean, I'm sure that there's been more development since now because obviously I'm always Facebook stalking you for the updates, and I'm convinced the way it looks now, it wasn't what it looked before.
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, what changed since? Well, that's like 2 years now. I'm signed to a gaming company called Phantasmagoria. They're like the biggest publisher of board games in Bulgaria. They normally translate and localize established board games for the local market. So basically, they buy the rights to games and localize them. They have their own game. The owner of the company made this really huge strategic deck building fighting crazy game called Battaglia. It was a huge Kickstarter success,
Oh, yeah.
and so was its expansion. And I'm actually the only author that he signs for a brand new original game. So it's very much an experiment, both for me and for the company, because it's my first big board gaming project, and I'm also their first author that they sign. So we'll see, but hopefully we'll manage. The studio really helped me. They had in-house artists who illustrated the whole thing, and I normally am not the one to say, "Oh, my project is amazing," but in terms of art, I really think he just knocked it out of the park. I'd say it's like industry standard, beautiful illustrations. You can check them out on our Facebook or like Instagram. It's King of All Bards everywhere. So we have the visuals, we have the rules, and we have working prototypes of the game that have traveled Europe quite a bit now. I think several hundreds of people have tried the game by now. We received very positive feedback, and we're confident that it will be fine. Like the game is fine, I'd say.
Yep, I've already requested my own copy when it's ready because it's
Oh,
about
yeah,
bards.
sure.
So there you go.
Oh yeah, maybe I should actually let the people know what it's all about. Yeah, it's a game about music. All of the characters are bards. You get your own unique character with his unique like instrument. We have like a bagpiper guy and a drummer girl and stuff like this. It's a fantasy setting, so the goal of the game is to go to a different pub every turn, perform a show, basically sing songs, and make fans and money. And whoever has a certain amount of like fans and money in terms of like rules, in terms of game pieces, become the most rich and famous, and therefore the king of all bards. However, the twist is that this is show business, and people are not necessarily very nice to each other. So you can like cut somebody's strings in the middle of the song, or call the guards on them to ruin their show. and it's very much a take that aggressive game about being rude to your friends while playing with these colorful, beautiful illustrations.
Yeah, we all love a bit of conflict over a board game sometimes. So sounds great.
Oh yeah. Every time I see playtesters get in an actual argument with each other, I'm like, yes, I did something right today.
Here I am destroying friendships.
You know you're doing something right.
Absolutely. Well, I guess on that note, I guess it's time to expose what the main topic of today is. We're actually going to be talking about board games. Yay, board games!
Yay.
So I think it would be perhaps a good idea if I know Mike has been in a few conventions locally lately, so maybe you could fill us in as to how things are going here in the UK, and then we'll pass the ball. And Nick, I have no idea how the game industry works in Australia and what sort of community-like events you have over there. So it would be great if you could fill us in on that. And then Nikola, if you can delve a bit more into what we have on your end of Europe, then that would be awesome. So Mike, where have you been lately? Because you've been like all over the country.
Yeah, well, the most recent convention I was at was Bastion in North Wales, which is quite an incredible little convention, to be honest. It's very small. They deliberately limited, I think, to around 80 people, but I could be wrong on the exact number. But it's held in a youth hostel, actually in the edge of the Welsh mountains. And when I first heard it was being held in a youth hostel, I went last year for the first time. I think it's only been run for 3 years. I must admit, I thought this is probably going to be a bit grim and basic and, not exactly opulent, let's say. And I couldn't have been more wrong. It's the most gorgeous setting. I mean, I love North Wales anyway, but the main room for gaming has an entire wall of glass looking out over the mountains and the passes. And it just actually makes for, it's a glorious setting. And the whole thing is geared, I've got to say, I went to my first game convention in 82, and this is one of the most friendly conventions I've ever been to. There's this whole attitude of, we are just here to have a good time. There's no sniping. There's free tea and coffee, which, okay, is a minor thing, but Lily knows me and coffee.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And it just seems very, very easy to mix. People are actively looking for people. We're about to set up a game of XYZ. We've got 2 spaces left. Anybody want to join in? People just leave notes with mobile phones with the organizer. If there's something you want, you can get anybody contacted. And it just strikes me as, maybe it's a sign of growing older, but I actually really enjoyed the idea of a convention where the whole point is to actually unwind, play games, chat, have fun. There's nobody trying to sell you anything. And, don't get me wrong, I like buying games. I'm sat in a room full of the things. But going back years, it was a more important feature of a convention to me, that you could go and buy those games you couldn't get in your local shop.
Yeah.
Well, the internet means now we can get anything we want.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think from a personal point of view, I think the idea of marketing at a convention is, to me, less important.
And playing the games physically is the best marketing there is, really.
Absolutely. And don't get me wrong, you are getting people turning up, small press publishers who are turning up with their games, but not selling them. But they are saying, do you want to play this? Yeah, I'll give it a go, And obviously, you're not going to like everything you play. But even then, they're not saying, you've enjoyed my game for only £15, you can take a copy with you. They're just saying, thanks for playing. And
nice.
if you do want to buy one, you can buy it online. But the main thrust of the whole thing is just to have a real unwindy time. And aside from the main hall, there's at least, I gamed in at least 3 other rooms beside the main hall. So if you want to play, for instance, one room was taken over almost entirely by a massive game of Eldritch Horror, with about 8 players and God knows how many tables with the map and cards, and because it's a game that sprawls, no pun intended. But there's enough space and enough limitation on numbers for you to actually get your own quiet room. I tried a new RPG or new to me, and the GM had just sort of said, "I've got a room booked 2 floors up." I didn't even know there were 2 floors up, I'll be honest, at the venue. And yeah, sure, we went up, and it was actually called the Observation Lounge. It would be lovely to see what the view was like if it hadn't been pitch black outside. But
All right.
yeah, gaming at night in North Wales in January, it's there wasn't a lot to see. But it just strikes me as, I think this is the sort of convention I want to see more of. That, I think they've got the focus exactly right. There's enough leeway that you can slope off with friends for a meal, come back, carry on gaming. Once they open the doors at something like, I think 1 p.m. on the Friday or something. 10 a.m. on the Friday, or it might even be late Thursday night now. As long as you've got a badge, you can come and go as you please. If you want to set a game going at 3 a.m, if you've got players, you can. And the whole thing just runs along on, 100% good nature.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds cool.
I would recommend it to anyone, as long as if anyone wants to go next year, please don't book until I've let you know I've got my ticket, because they do sell out very quick. So
Okay.
Oh God.
We'll leave a space for you.
yeah,
I think this thing that Mike is referring to, though, is really interesting, and I think, at least, that it's starting to become certainly more popular in the UK, because you start seeing it. Local towns and places have these smaller conventions, mostly aimed to the community to take part in, and just actually contribute. Like just a couple of weeks ago, down in Portsmouth, the Guildhall was celebrating their. I'm not entirely sure anymore if it's annual or biannual games convention, where they do have both games and video games. So I think this type of movement is becoming, more and more popular, because, well, at the end of the day, that's what games are about, or to have fun. But I know that it's not always the same in all other places. So I'm really curious to know, about the 2 Nicks. How are things in that sort of environment on your end of the world?
Sorry, could I just interject with one last brief point from the UK?
Sure.
The one thing I've also seen over the last probably 10 years or so is the advent of play space in shops, which is great, and I'm sure that's certainly not unique to the UK. I'm well aware of that. But one thing I would like to say, and I've noticed, is that more than one shop, the first one I noticed it in was Fanboy 3 in Manchester, which was probably the first shop anywhere near me that opened up with such a huge amount of play space. But the one thing that's impressed me there from day one was this absolutely inflexible rule of, we do not tolerate any sexist comments or abuse, bullying. And it was so refreshing to be in there once and somebody let rip with a mouthful of language that the intent as well as the language itself was offensive. And I'm not going to repeat it. No. And one of the staff members walking through, he just turned to the guy and said, "You've been one before, leave." And he made some point about, "I've just paid to play in a tournament." He said, "Don't care, leave, out, go. We don't have it." And that has been such a wonderful, refreshing change to me to see. I mean, I remember that, in fact, I was in more of a war game shop about 4 or 5 years ago, and it still had this air of nasty, unpleasant 1980s about it. And I asked about a particular miniature, and the staff member didn't even answer me. It was one of the customers sort of said, "Oh, I think it's coming in on Wednesday or something." And you think, hang on, first time I've walked into your shop, I have money, I could spend it, but if you're going to be rude, forget it. But the one thing I love about several of the more modern shops is just that creating that safe space where, regardless of race, gender, whatever, everyone goes in as an equal, everyone treats each other with respect. And I was over in Fanboy 3 playing a couple of weeks ago, and it's still, even at the new, bigger premises, unsurprisingly, they've kept the same ethos. And frankly, I think we should be lauding these sort of places.
Yeah, and again, that's one thing I wanted to ask about from our other 2 guests, because, like, for example, me growing up in Spain, board games and this sort of thing were really outlandish. Even though my parents and I would be traveling across Europe, particularly to Germany and France, where board games are a big thing, and I mean, let's face it, we have really big games in the industry, such as Asmodee, that are in those two areas. But yeah, I completely appreciate what Mike is saying, that at least in some other places where perhaps the hobby is not so developed, it can be really rough just finding that, not just convention but community space where you can actually just share and have a good time. So how are your sort of experiences in that regard down in the land down under, I guess?
It's my experiences sort of have really changed over the last 5 or 10 years. Like I really resonated with what Mike said about the what was it, the stink of the 1980s.
Yeah. You don't want to go
Yeah.
back there.
We I would dare say that the Australian board game hobby kind of held the stink of the 1980s well into the 1990s. Where there was kind of this, apart from obviously your Monopoly or your Snakes and Ladders or your sort of what would you call it, your department store kind of board game.
The sort of Christmas board games.
Every family had a copy of Monopoly that they'd had many arguments over, and that it had
Everyone hated to play but still did.
Yeah, and now we don't talk to Uncle Barry because he cheated, and we don't talk to Auntie Flo because she threw the table at us and that kind of thing. So everyone had those kind of board games, but when you start talking about your Risks or your Axis and Allies or your Ark of Horrors, those kind of things were like really locked in like comic book stores specifically, or pop culture hobby stores. And usually in big cities, so like Melbourne, Sydney, Canberra, and so you'd have to actually kind of go to those places or order directly from those places to actually access them. I mean, I'm even talking like up to the 2000s, because Australia's internet is substandard to the moon. The idea of like internet ordering has only really come in the last couple of decades. So we really kind of weren't exposed to much. Lately, however, over the last 5-10 years, it's really, really kind of changed and exploded. You're seeing like smaller towns now with game stores with substantial play spaces. Conventions emerging outside of the Melbourne, Sydney, Canberra. Does everyone know Australia's sort of like urban geography when I say Melbourne, Sydney, Canberra?
I do, but I will not reply for everyone else.
I guess okay. I guess we've got 3 major cities in Australia. We've got Melbourne, we've got Sydney, and we've got Canberra by default because it's the capital. Even though it's really just a glorified sheep paddock. And a city of circles, like all the roads just go in circles around the sheep paddock. It's they keep the sheep out, but they let kangaroos in. It's bizarre. And they let politicians in, which was probably the biggest mistake to do with your capital city.
Right.
Yeah. So, outside of these sort of the major urban hubs, you really weren't getting any board games or that sort of all the play spaces for them, until relatively recently. And those play spaces prior to relatively recently were really sort of like your your masculine nerd space.
Right.
You have the sweat. You could walk in and kind of smell the sweat of a disappointed youth.
Yeah.
Yeah, that seems far too familiar.
Whereas these days it's very much, they're all open, they're very public, they're very inviting spaces. They occur with getting major franchises like places like Good Games, Mind Games, kind of popping up across the country. So like even though the attitude in, say, where I live, Ballarat, we're an hour and a half from Melbourne, which is a major city. The attitude used to be, oh, why would you bother having a game store in Ballarat when you could just drive to Melbourne? It's like we're seeing them pop up in smaller towns now. And with that, then with the growth of the local scene, we're starting to get our first sort of conventions outside of major cities. So Ballarat, and when I say first conventions out of major cities, Ballarat's convention, PopCon, is in its second year. Albury, where I grew up, its convention's coming into its fourth. So it's really, a fun and exciting time to be playing into this hobby in Australia because everything's just sort of blossoming for the first time. And people, you get people going, wow, did you, hear about a board game night, and it's like, yes, I did. It's like, why don't you come along? And, why don't we get together and play this? So, yeah, very exciting. In terms of the professional scene, it's still very much seen as, see, Australia's got this sort of colonial inferiority complex. It's like, why would we manufacture that when we can just import it?
Mhm.
Right.
Particularly around pop culture.
Hmm.
Everything from television as far back as the 1960s. We kind of went, why would we start making our own stuff when we can buy the Munsters?
Yeah.
Or the Flintstones or whatever. So we very much have that about board games as well. Like, why would we make that when, we can just import something from Europe or the US? There is like sort of a growing, struggling kind of board game industry here, but it's very much individual creators off their own back producing and publishing something and
Like yourself.
founding small, yes. Yeah, founding small companies to make it happen.
Sorry,
I
sorry.
wanted. Oh yeah, you go, Mike.
Okay. No, just that's kind of sad in a way because I remember back in the 1980s, there was an Australian publisher called the Australian Games Group, or TAG, that did some really innovative role-playing games. Particularly, Lily's heard me rant about this more times than she wants to remember, I'm sure, but a game called Lace and Steel from Paul Kidd.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Which is just an utterly, utterly glorious piece of work. And it's kind of a shame that really you were, as a nation, there were designers there that were doing things way ahead of the Americans 20 odd years ago.
Yep. But again, it's like in terms of actually making an impact in Australia, it's you go internationally to do it, and you largely, either try to align yourself with an American market or in a UK market, or you pretend to be part of it.
Okay.
I wanted to ask Nick actually, how much do people in Australia, these small startups and whatnot, rely on things like Kickstarter? Because at least in the UK, you get a Kickstarter like every freaking second these days, and I know it's just as much in the US. We'll be having Jason Tundro later on in the week. And Jason is a master of Kickstarter. He's moved a lot of things through that platform, so I know that works really well in the United States. But how is that in your experience down in Australia? Is it very much used, or do you have maybe something similar? Because I know similar projects have started happening in different nations. Like in Spain, we use this platform called Verkami, which is pretty much the same like Kickstarter, just sort of locally sourced.
Pretty much Kickstarter is what people is still the go-to in Australia. Yeah, Kickstarter, or a lot of people use print on demand publishers,
right.
so third-party publishers like the Game Crafter, or RPG Now. So it's either it's generally keep the cost low or find some other way to source it.
I think crowdfunding in general has been quite a big boost to board games and RPGs as well.
Yeah, and actually on that note, I think our other Nick can probably tell us a lot more about, because I know he knows these spheres of crowdfunding and just sort of getting involved with the local people quite well. So how about you tell us some more about that, Nick, and the places that you've been recently, because you've been in a few local conventions presenting your work.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's weird how relatable I find both what Mike and Nick said, because we have like both of these things here locally. Like historically speaking, we didn't really have anything going on in the 90s. Political struggle, I know that I'm sure has a part in it. But then things kind of picked up. Like in the early 2000s, it was like little Magic the Gathering shops and D&D groups here and there. And then board games started making it big. Like I remember when Small World first came, and everybody was like, "Hey, did you see this game? It's like really interesting." And people started going on Board Game Geek, and the hobby formed, and we kind of had the community. And then some like 5-6 years ago, I think we had like a little revolution here locally, because the board game cafe culture happened. I
Yeah.
know a couple of guys who just took the risk, opened a board gaming cafe. And it's very like romantic story. In one particular case, they were a family, and they were avid board gamers. They adopted a couple of kids who were very hyperactive, and they wanted to just preserve their games, so they opened this little board game cafe just so their friends can come over and play games. They didn't really expect to make a profit out of it, and it was huge. Like it really changed the business because
So cute.
yeah, it was great. And they had, just because they made it for themselves, it was like very cozy, very like feeling like home. And people really
Nice.
appreciated that. And this actually started at least like 4 or 5 different similar bars. So a scene all of a sudden formed. And this is where like your aunt would say, "Hey, have you played Dixit? Because I went to this beautiful cafe the other day and they showed me this game." And suddenly, like, games were mainstream, which is amazing to me. And a part of this community are still very much casual people who like beers and meat, and they would go to the cafe with their friends on a Friday. But some of them really got into the hobby, amassed collections of games, and now we have some like hardcore gamers that are really developing the hobby here. And this leads me to the other point. Like Mike, you said something about people just going to a little convention to play games and not trying to sell or buy anything. We have a similar situation here. It's like a little hotel in the mountains, where similar story, like a group of friends just went there one year to play some games outside of the city, and the next year they invited some more people, and the next year they invited some more people. And now it's like an annual occurrence where you just go in the nature, you play board games for 3 days or 5 days, and just have fun.
That sounds
Sounds
awesome.
great.
Yep.
It's really beautiful thing. But apart from this, we're trying to have normal like conventions. We have at least 3, I'd say, annual conventions going on in different cities. Just like to give you context, we're less than 7 million in population, so kind of like the Australian situation, only like much smaller. But we basically have the 3 big cities, and everything's happening there. So like those 3 big cities have their own conventions going on. I was in one of them a couple of weeks ago, and again, it was like just open to everybody. It was in the mall of the city. It had no entrance fee, so everybody could just go to the mall and be like, "Oh, so there's people sitting here. Let's check this out." So like half of the people were there just completely by accident, and half of them were the hardcore gamers that travel specifically for the event from all over the country and even neighboring countries. And it was beautiful because on these conventions you can always find people showcasing their prototypes. So you can talk to designers, you can talk to the owners of the shops of the like 3 big cities, and it's like our little industry family thing is all together, and people are playing games together, and it's very very positive, very beautiful.
Cool.
See, I think that family thing and friendly thing is really something that we can. It sounds to me like it's something that we can relate, and I'm to me especially because I was really lucky. I know I was really lucky. My parents are geeks. My parents are board gamers, and in their little flat in Spain, they have a collection that I think probably now goes well beyond 300 to 400 board games, which is insane because I don't even know where we are fitting them. Well, I know where we're fitting them in my room because I'm not there. But
Lily,
yeah.
Lily, the word isn't insane; it's impressive.
Yeah, no, I know. But like my dad always loved it, and he really encouraged us to join in and take part in playing board games with the family. And I think that's something that it sometimes is missing when you go to places like without wanting to point negative fingers to anywhere. We recently went to Dice in Portsmouth. We've had a review of Dice not long ago. So hello, the guys in Dice who are really nice. And one of the things that we really liked was that although it was a modern place, it felt cozy. You could stay there and play for as long as you wanted, and you weren't going to feel unwelcomed at any point. Whilst there is some other places where go and feel like you need to have a very quick game and pretty much get out because it's crowded or you can't talk to people, and it is difficult. I've always thought that board games was essentially just about that, about getting cozy, a few snacks with your friends, and just essentially finding out who's paying the beers that night. Because that's how we roll. I'm not a very big fan of co-op games. I think everyone knows that now. It's heresy in my family if you like co-op games. I play a few, but it's mostly the competitive stuff, and I think it's also a healthy way of digging to each other because it's all over a board game. Once the board game is over, it's done. It's like what you were saying, Nick. You feel happy when you've seen these players are digging at each other and they've only met 5 minutes ago. I think it's a strange way of bonding, but I think some of the best friendships I've had have been through this. In fact, that's how, in case you guys didn't know, that's how Alex and I met. I used to be the social secretary for the Game Society at Winchester University, or sorry, the University of Winchester. We're not a polytechnic. Apologies for that. And when I joined, we were like 4 official members and 6 on a good day, which usually meant 4 official members and 2 people who were just hanging around for whatever reason. And just because, I like board games, I took over a few bits and bobs, and just started bringing people in, and that's how we met. I think I completely trashed you at a game of Hex. And funnily enough, Alex has been looking for this game, Hex, since then, and recently managed to acquire a copy because the bloody thing had gone off print. It was a nice memory. That
important game for me because I never really was into board games that much before going to university. So when everyone talks about the board game scene getting big and stuff, I'm part of the new wave of people getting into it, I guess.
Cool. The new wave of board gamers is like.
But I think there's also the thing that we seem to, and obviously I can only speak from a UK perspective here, but a few years ago, if you had someone taking part in a game show or whatever on TV and they said their hobby was playing D&D or playing board games, there would be the snide comments.
Yeah.
Oh, really? At your age or whatever,
Yeah.
And yet, I think even in the mainstream media, over probably the past 5 years or so, we're starting to see a more accepting stance.
Yeah.
And I don't know if anybody else. It's going to be a weird reference here, but the Great British Bake Off, which is for those outside the UK, and I think you probably know where I'm going with this.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
It's a vast, big audience program. Yeah. And one of the contestants this year, was the partner of the guy that runs the Travelling Man chain of shops. And she did really well in the program. And when they did the bit about the contestants, they were showing footage of Kim Joy and Nabil, the Travelling Man guy, playing Takenoko. I can never say it. The game of the pandas. Thank you.
Panda game.
Yeah, little panda game. Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, that one. But I thought it was lovely that they were saying, here they are relaxing at home, playing games like they normally do with friends. Rather than any kind of negative, no cheap laugh at the expense of a gamer or whatever. And it just seems, that articles in the Sunday supplements, that I don't know if gaming has become mass market trendy or whether it's just that people are actually, which I would much prefer, becoming more accepting that this is a valid hobby
Yeah.
And no one's saying everyone should join in, but it's no more weird or geeky to me than playing golf. I wouldn't play golf.
Well, it's interesting how board games and role playing games lags behind video games in a lot of ways, considering it's a lot older. Just I think video games became a bigger industry very quick, and it just became more accepted, I suppose.
Well, it's funny that you say that, Alex, because I think this has a lot to do with what Nick said earlier about we are all a bit cyborg these days, and I think that sort of changing into that connection between human and machine happened very quickly, and that's what allowed video games to be so successful as in comparison to other more traditional hobbies, I suspect.
But you can see why board games still live, even though computer games became so sophisticated. Like I'm sure in the past people thought, oh, computer games will just replace it completely. But even with role-playing games, things like that, I mostly started with video games, and then, like I said, in the past few years I play board games and RPGs more. But a lot of the stuff that I felt that was missing from video game RPGs, I found in traditional RPGs. The elements of freedom and things like that. The video games are always chasing after, but physical RPGs can actually do that a lot easier in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
And there's an actual contact with a living person in front of you. I think this is actually a big part of it. And like even outside of the world of games, like vinyl records are like trendy again, just because they are real and people like this feeling of having something this one-of-a-time experience. It's physical. It wears off. Every time you play the record again, it will be a little bit worse, but that's the point. And I think, especially in a world where we're like tied to our computers for the entire day, and normally when we go out of the office, we go home to our other computer to spend the evening there. It's very important to actually have actual people on the table that you can have fun with. You can like throw your dice at them when you're angry. And this is the reason people play board games more and more.
And it's interesting how that, like, when you two are both talking about your the experience of board games in your countries, it's interesting how much geography ties into that, because with video games or something, that's not really much of a factor, but with board games, obviously, because it's physical, it's more of a problem to get people together or to get shops or conventions going more easily. Because
I know a lot of people who would travel 3 hours, 4 hours to go to a gaming convention far away from their city just so they can play their favorite game, one that they've played hundreds of times, just because it's with new people, or it's a tournament and they know it's a casual, stupid tournament, no actual prizes to win, but they would actually go through the effort and go there just to have fun with their game and meet new people.
I mean, I travel 2 hours or more to go to Lily's house to play board games.
This has become a recurrent theme.
But that's the only place I play board games. I don't have any, so I got to go to Lily's house.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you do have a couple of board games that we haven't tried yet, actually, mostly because I've bought them for you. But it's how we roll. Actually, on
literally.
Yeah, absolutely. On that note, I'm actually really curious, and I think it would be a really nice way of wrapping things up, because I know that the time is sort of ticking. If we all could share just a little moment about, I don't know, either a board game that means a lot to you, either from a purely sentimental and nonsensical way, or maybe the board game that sort of got you into the hobby and that inspired you to do things. So if I start with mine, maybe, and then we can get it rolling. I think I remember fondly playing Uno when I was little, but I think the board game, and maybe it's very stereotypical, right? But the board game that got me for the first time was Ticket to Ride, because we actually bought that game in one of our trips as a sort of family gift. We were in this, I think it was the Kaufmann galleries in either Frankfurt or Heidelberg or Mainz. I can't remember. It was a big German city where we were traveling. And, back then the game had only been just published. 2005 or 6 must have been. And this edition only came with the game rules in German.
Okay.
So I remember having to go home with the game, and my dad using the internet, which I think must have been just recently installed at home, and dig, like you were saying, Nick, earlier, from one of these online forums and communities, the rules in English, let alone in Spanish. No chance you could get them in Spanish. So we could play. And I think just the background behind the game itself, and the fact that this was the first tactile game that I had played that wasn't chess or something like that, really had an impact on me. And that I really like the fact that you have your little trains and you have to place them down, and it just kind of seems to add another depth that's simply holding your cards up. So as cheesy or classic as it may be, that was actually one of my first board games that I think got me into the hobby. So next one, I don't know, whoever wants to take the floor, go for it.
Shall I then?
Yeah, sure.
We kind of already mentioned it, but Hex. I don't know if many people have even really played this game or heard of it, because it was out of print for a while. But yeah, I played it first in 2012 when I went to uni. I don't know who owned it, or if it was owned by the society or something.
It was owned by the society. It was completely trashed.
Yeah, it was so worn out.
It was literally a lot of the what's it called? A lot of the pieces were just cardboard. And the cards, like the edges, were completely worn off, and the cardboard of the actual pieces, in some cases, were so misshapen that it was difficult to know what you were moving around the table, if it was a hex or something else. But yeah, no, it was a society copy.
But yeah, it's such a fun game. Like I still remember clearly that day when I first came along. I wasn't really sure what societies I was going to get into, but the game society sounded good. But there was a couple of games there that didn't really click with me. But then once we started playing Hex, it's basically just like a hot potato game. You've got your cards, and there's no turns or anything. So whenever you've got the little hex counter in front of you, you play a card to try and get rid of it. And then if you've run out of cards and it lands on you, then you lose life. And you just send it around the board. It ends up multiplying into multiple hexes, and it can just go crazy. But if everyone gets into the rhythm of it, it's just everyone throwing cards down on the table and shouting what they're doing. It's hilarious.
Yeah, or even not even shouting, just sort of, you only just kind of end up hearing the thump of hand card table,
Yeah.
and you kind of end up looking down like, oh,
Yeah.
I have 3 hexes in front of me and no cards. Well, I guess I'm screwed.
Yeah. Or someone just plays like a game stopper where I can't remember what the card is, but you have to like put your hands on your head, and the last person to do it loses life.
Hex. That's the card.
So yeah, it's a pretty silly game. It's quite simple, but it's just so fun. So yeah, I didn't play it for years after we left university, and then finally found it again. A big, nice, brand new version of it with a couple of other like game modes, and I'm going to keep that in as nice condition as I can. Yeah.
Right. Well, maybe we should finish the UK cycle, and Mike, you can tell us what was that board game for you.
I think I'm going to cheat very slightly, very briefly. I was always the kid that for Christmas my major present would always be a board game.
Yeah, that was, I figured.
Yeah, I know. And back in the 70s, probably about 10, there's a game called Haunted House, which was slightly bizarre for a game of that era, in that you had a 3D cardboard house that you move your tokens around, and if you land on drew a certain card, you dropped a ball bearing down the chimney of the house, and it tripped physical traps. So there was a secret panel that would fly out from the wall and knock your character over and things like this. And I kind of loved it as a kid, but it was exactly what it claimed to be. It was a game for 10-year-olds, whatever, and was fun. And a few years ago, it was reissued with a Scooby-Doo rebrand.
Oh my god!
And even better, that they've upped the mechanics on the board phenomenally. So it's now got about 3 floors, one above the other. There are things like a moose head on the wall which can reach out and nibble your character. You can get caught in a mummy case that closes on you. All sorts of things.
That's amazing.
It is probably one of the most remarkable, entertaining games for 4 slightly drunken adults to play at any point. I'll make this offer here and now. If anybody around the metaphorical table wants to come over to my place and play it at some point with alcohol, then the offer stands.
Great.
on a fractionally more serious note, when I was playing more adult games, by sort of mid to late 80s, I was addicted to a role-playing game called Chill, a Victorian horror game, which I still think is phenomenal. And they produced a board game, and I bought it purely out of the collector in me saying, there's a Chill product I haven't got.
Mm.
And I was kind of, it'll sit on a shelf, it won't go anywhere, And I took it over to show to a couple of friends at our role-playing night on a Friday night. And somebody was late turning up or something, so the guy whose house it was said, let's give it a try, shall we? And the short answer is, that was about 8 p.m. When the house owner's wife came down the next morning at 7:30 and found us still sat around their dining room table playing this game.
Wow.
Because we'd played about 15 games of it. And it was the first game I found that introduced two now more common mechanics. One is you build the board as you play from tiles. And the other is that you tailor the deck of cards depending on the randomly chosen scenario. So most of the players play what are called envoys, or are the monster hunters, and they start at the gates to the mansion. And the other player, the last one, plays the minion who is in servitude to the master. And the minion is the only person who knows what the master is. So it could be a vampire, a werewolf, some sort of phantom, whatever. And through play, you determine what you're facing. And of course, if it's a vampire, you can also find artifacts. You have to find the one artifact that will kill the master. So silver bullet, wooden stake, whatever. Locate the master and kill him. Whereas the minion player just has to grab hold of whatever the artifact is and make it out of the garden and through the gate, so that the master can remain unchallenged. But where it really, really scores is that throughout the game, you will change sides. The minion can be cured and turn to human. Humans can be bitten and turn to minions. And this can happen time and time again. And it just became one of the most screamingly funny nights of gaming I've ever had. But, there are so many catchphrases, many of which are not repeatable.
Okay.
From that night, where people were coming up with their own little descriptions of the action and beating up the minion to send him back into the chapel. And if he ends up in the chapel while beaten up, he becomes a human. So he comes out again and says, "Hey guys, we need to get the wooden stake or whatever."
That sounds really adorable in a very gross way.
I think board games is where the most obscure in-jokes come from.
Oh god, yes.
Absolutely.
Very probably. But again, it is a fantastic game. It's hard to find, but if anybody ever sees one, honestly, dive on it, because it's a lost gem.
Mm.
Awesome. Well, then I guess it's to our Outremer guests. So I don't know, whichever of you two would like to go first. I'm dying to see your choices here, because I could have guessed the other two, but this has me on the edge of the table now. So please, someone say something.
Ooh, exciting. I'd like to continue Mike's last point about board gaming catchphrases. This is amazing. Like, because we have so much terminology that's very game specific. I actually have a story. We were at the board gaming bar, of course, and all of a sudden the music stopped for whatever reason. And just for like a couple of seconds, you could hear separate tables and their conversations. And it was like, I'm buying turtles. And the other one was like, if you attack me, I'll kill you. And the other one was like, yeah, bricks for sure. And it made like a sentence almost. And
just
it's
nonsense.
amazing how, but it's a nonsense, but it also makes sense.
Of course.
Yeah. I had a female friend who was the room went quiet during a game of Great Western Trails. And all the entire room heard was my friend shout, "To the man shed!"
Nice.
Yeah, I have like it's almost a board game story. My board game that has like very special significance is probably the D&D 3.5 core set, like the box with the miniatures.
Okay.
Yeah, because when I was younger, I actually had to teach Dungeons and Dragons myself because there was nobody who knew the game in my town, and I really wanted to play it. Like, I saw it on the internet and I was like, wow, this looks amazing. So I actually downloaded version of basic Dungeons and Dragons that some fan had translated to Bulgarian, just
Mm.
like as a hobby, and it's like the very first, the Red Book, and
Okay.
I
Yeah.
actually had to learn D&D just like people did in the 70s because there was nobody there to explain it to me. Yeah, and also the Red Book, well, it wasn't professionally translated. That was
Yeah.
also a
God,
thing.
that must have been. Oh wow.
Yes,
A
and
very
also,
authentic experience then.
yeah. The book has like little segment that's also like it's like choose your own adventure type, right? You can just read it
Yeah.
and
Oh
that's
yeah.
it for the game. And I remember that I ordered this box with the miniatures and dice and everything because it contains whatever you need to play. It came from Greece because there nobody was selling it at the time. And I remember the first time I set it up, I invited my friends. I had to explain what Dungeons and Dragons is, even though I wasn't sure myself. And we had to run through a game, and it went fine, and they were happy. And I was like, wow, I did this all by myself. And then this world opened, and I felt like a god who can, come up with stories and monsters and things. And I haven't changed my attitude since, I think. So,
Brilliant.
yeah.
That's the right attitude to have.
Absolutely.
You are God.
Well, no, that's not exactly what I meant. But yeah, I mean, I found myself in this brave new world of fantasy, and I'm still living there. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
That's fair. Well, I guess it's only fair that we finish the talk with the person that is I'm not entirely sure if terribly early or incredibly late. So Nick,
Early.
yeah. So Nick, tell us about whatever game is it that's give you this experience
Well,
or
I so relate to the other Nick because, like, the comic store near where I grew up, was this terribly small place. So they had they had like a table crammed with like basically a space to play board games between and it was like a quarter inch of floor space between back issues, the table, new issues, and then they had a shelf of role playing games and board games kind of stuffed in amongst each other. And so I kind of gravitated to the role play games, and that was really my gateway drug into board gaming. So I really relate to the whole feeling of, trying to explain to your friends what a role play game is and feeling like this narcissistic god going, no, look, here's the world. This is what we're playing in. Yes, you can do that. Pardon me. So I think like for a long time, I just
right.
early morning dry throat.
Bless you. Yeah.
Could get out of bed to get a glass of water, but it's cold. No, so for a long time, I just stuck with role playing games simply because that's all I'd been exposed to, and I think it was really like I was doing my PhD when I really started to play board games, simply because I didn't have time to write the role play game narratives in the great detail that I'd been accustomed to, and I picked up a copy of Twilight Imperium, the third edition.
Oh, wow.
And
That was your first board game that you picked up?
Wow.
yeah, I
Baptism
played,
of fire
I
there, isn't it?
played things like Arkham Horror before then, and like Vampire Prince of the City because they had a role playing kind of element.
Yeah.
But that was really the first board game that I picked up that was actually just I picked up because I wanted it, not because someone else had like recommended it or because my partner at the time had wanted it for their birthday. So no, that was like my first board game, and it blew my freaking mind, to be honest. Like what it could do
I'm
in
not
the best way.
surprised.
And I spent I started to arrange instead of we didn't really play Dungeons and Dragons until recently. We were playing things like Deadlands or Vampire, lots of Vampire. Yeah, so I started to arrange Twilight Imperium days, and those were just like wonderful days of just drinking beer and yelling abuse at friends, and stabbing them in the big fleet maneuvers and going, ha ha ha, I set that up so you'd fall, you fool, you fool. and making, big sweeping daring moves, and coming away with stories of going, well, you probably shouldn't have done that. It's like, yeah, but it was fun. And that was kind of like, I guess, the guts of it was like, well, we didn't really remember. We don't really remember. Like with Twilight Imperium, it goes on for so long. We don't really remember
God,
the
yeah.
end, who wins, nor do we really care. Like I've got these two friends that every time they play, they sit next to each other, and we try to separate them. But they don't want to be separated, and they have. They set the board up with as many blank spaces between themselves and everyone else as possible, and they just play with each other. They will duke it out over their two home planets all night, all day and night, and ignore everyone else. And we go, okay, once they're playing, they're doing their thing. It's their game. We won't interfere, and they won't come over and interfere in ours. So yeah, Twilight Imperium.
Nice. So is that? I'm not sure, but is this the game that can like last multiple days?
Yeah.
And it's
Twilight
huge.
Imperium can go on forever, quite
It
literally.
officially states that a game takes about 6 hours. This is a
Right.
blatant lie. It takes more than 10.
We actually knocked it over in 4 at one point.
Oh, that's pretty impressive.
We because we've been playing it so often, we got a small group together, and we just basically said, okay, let's see if we can do it in the time limit. And it was basically everyone had a time limit on how long they could take to make their moves. And it was like watching a normal game of Twilight Imperium play on fast forward. We're all just like, we're not talking, we're just going bang, bang, bang. To be honest, it was the least enjoyable game I played.
Oh,
Right.
Probably.
I missed the opportunity to, yell abuse at my friends.
Of course.
Too-
Oh, yeah.
Like
Too
we
much
said earlier,
plonking.
that's what it's
Yeah.
all about.
Exactly.
Coming together and yelling abuse.
Well,
And saying things we can't take back.
yeah. Well, on that note, I'm really glad that you guys have joined us today. I've been really looking forward to this. So thank you for coming together and talking about what we all are so dedicated towards. And thank you, Mike, for joining again and for staying on board.
No problem.
And I guess we'll see you guys on the next one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll have links to both of the Nick's work that they're currently producing. So check that out, everyone listening.
Mhm.
And yeah, that's us for another episode of the podcast.
Yeah. So it's goodbye from me.
Bye.
Cheers.